The year was 1984, and the sleepy town of Cloverton, Massachusetts, was about to experience a series of events that would challenge even the most rational minds. I've covered hundreds of strange cases in my time, but this one stands out because it represents one of the few instances where law enforcement officials went on record attributing the solution of a case to forces beyond conventional explanation. This story begins with the disappearance of 8-year-old Emily Prescott. On the morning of October 12, 1984, Emily's mother, Sarah, sent her daughter to wait for the school bus at the end of their long rural driveway. When Sarah arrived at her daughter's school later that day to pick her up, she was informed that Emily had never arrived. The bus driver confirmed he had never picked up Emily that morning. A search was immediately launched. Cloverton was a town of just over 5,000 people, where crime was so rare that the police department consisted of only 7 full-time officers. The disappearance of a child was completely unprecedented. Chief Michael Harmon, a 28-year veteran of the force who had spent his entire career in Cloverton, would later recall that this case was the moment everything changed for their community. The initial search for Emily involved nearly every resident of the town. People combed through the dense woods surrounding the Prescott property. Dive teams examined nearby ponds and creeks. Search dogs were brought in from neighboring counties, but oddly, they couldn't seem to pick up Emily's scent beyond the spot where she should have been waiting for the bus. It was as if the child had simply vanished into thin air. After 3 days of searching, with no sign of Emily and no leads to follow, Chief Harmon made a difficult call. He reached out to the state police and requested assistance from their missing persons unit. Detective Karen Malloy arrived the following morning. Detective Malloy had built a reputation for solving difficult missing persons cases, particularly those involving children. She had a methodical approach and an almost uncanny ability to see connections others missed. Upon arrival, Detective Malloy immediately requested to see Emily's bedroom. This was standard procedure, of course. The bedroom of a missing child often contains vital clues about their state of mind, their interests, and potentially their whereabouts. But what happened in that bedroom would later become the first in a series of inexplicable events that would define this case. As Detective Malloy entered the room, she described feeling an immediate drop in temperature. Now, October in Massachusetts can certainly be chilly, but this was different. Malloy would later testify that it felt like walking into a freezer. She asked Sarah Prescott if the heating in this room was faulty, to which Sarah replied that it wasn't. In fact, Emily's room was typically the warmest in the house due to its southern exposure. While examining Emily's belongings, Detective Malloy noticed a drawing pinned to a corkboard above the child's desk. It depicted what appeared to be a small red cabin or shed in the woods. When questioned about it, Sarah explained that Emily had been drawing the same structure repeatedly over the past few weeks. When asked if such a building existed on their property or nearby, Sarah was certain it did not. That evening, as Detective Malloy was reviewing her notes at the local motel where she was staying, she received a phone call from Officer James Wilkins, one of Cloverton's patrol officers. Wilkins reported that the department had just received a strange call from an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway, who lived about 3 miles from the Prescott home. Miss Holloway claimed she had seen Emily that very morning, standing at the edge of her property, looking into the woods. When Officer Wilkins arrived to follow up, Miss Holloway was adamant about what she had seen, despite the fact that Emily had been missing for 4 days by that point. Now, normally, such a report might be dismissed as confusion from an elderly witness, or perhaps a well-intentioned but misguided attempt to help the investigation. But something about the certainty in Miss Holloway's statement compelled Detective Malloy to visit her first thing the next morning. Margaret Holloway lived alone in a house that had been in her family for generations. At 87 years old, she was one of the oldest residents in Cloverton, but by all accounts, her mind was still sharp. When Detective Malloy arrived, Miss Holloway was waiting on her porch. Without any prompting, She pointed toward the tree line at the edge of her property and said she was right there, looking for the red shed. Detective Malloy felt a chill run through her body. Miss Holloway had mentioned a red shed, just like the structure in Emily's drawings. When questioned about this, Miss Holloway explained that there used to be an old hunting cabin deep in those woods, built by her late husband some 50 years ago. It had been painted red originally, though she hadn't seen it in decades and assumed it had long since rotted away. Armed with this new information, Detective Malloy organized a search party to explore the area. This is where the case takes its first, truly bizarre turn. The search party, consisting of 5 officers, including Detective Malloy, set out into the woods following directions provided by Miss Holloway. After about an hour of hiking through increasingly dense forest, they reached a small clearing. And there, standing in stark contrast to the autumn colors surrounding it, was a small red shed. The structure appeared weathered, but was in surprisingly good condition considering its supposed age. The red paint was faded, but still visible. Officer Wilkins, who had grown up in Cloverton and knew these woods well, was visibly confused. He insisted that he had hunted in this area many times over the years and had never encountered this building before. As the team approached the shed, Detective Malloy noted in her official report that her flashlight began to malfunction, flickering on and off despite having fresh batteries. The other officers reported similar issues with their equipment. The temperature, which had been a comfortable 58 degrees Fahrenheit, suddenly dropped to the point where they could see their breath. These details were all documented in the official police report, unusual for law enforcement documentation, which typically sticks to objective, verifiable facts. Inside the shed, they found a child's hair ribbon, matching the description of what Emily had been wearing the day she disappeared. There was no other sign of the girl, but scratched into one of the wooden walls was a crude map. It appeared to show a path leading from the shed to what looked like a circular structure, perhaps a well or a storm drain. Following the directions on the carved map, the search team located an old well about a quarter-mile from the shed. The well had been covered with wooden boards that appeared to have been recently disturbed. When they removed the covering, they could see that the well wasn't particularly deep, perhaps 15 feet, and had long since dried up. At the bottom, curled up and unconscious but still alive, was Emily Prescott. Emily was immediately rushed to the hospital. Physically, she was dehydrated and had suffered minor injuries, but nothing life-threatening. Psychologically, however, she appeared to be in shock. When she finally began speaking again 2 days later, her story defied rational explanation. According to Emily, after she had gone to wait for the bus that morning, she had seen a shimmering lady at the edge of the woods who looked like Grandma Prescott, her paternal grandmother who had died 3 years earlier. The figure had beckoned to Emily, and she had followed, believing it was somehow really her grandmother. Emily recounted being led deep into the woods to the red shed, where she became frightened when the figure disappeared. She tried to find her way home but became disoriented and eventually fell into the well. When asked how she survived for 4 days at the bottom of a well with no food or water, Emily's answer was simple and unwavering. "Grandma brought me water and told me stories until the police could find me." She also explained that her grandmother had told her to scratch the map on the wall of the shed so that the nice police lady with the flashlight would find her. Now, at this point in the investigation, the official response would typically be to attribute Emily's story to trauma, dehydration, and the imagination of a frightened child. And initially, that's exactly what happened. The official theory was that Emily had wandered into the woods for unknown reasons, found the shed, attempted to find her way back, and accidentally fell into the well. Her survival was attributed to a combination of luck, the relatively mild weather, and possible access to rainwater at the bottom of the well. But here's where this case diverges from the typical missing persons resolution. 3 unexplainable elements continued to trouble investigators. First, how did Emily know about the red shed? The structure wasn't visible from any trail or road, and according to her parents, she had never been in that part of the woods before. Second, The search dogs had been unable to track Emily's scent beyond her driveway. Multiple canine units with impeccable track records had failed to pick up any trail leading into the woods. Third, and perhaps most perplexing, was the timing of Emily's drawings. She had been drawing the red shed for weeks before her disappearance, despite supposedly never having seen it.